ancient army of warriors has been quietly conquering the world. Wherever small battalions of China's famous terracotta warriors are exhibited, they win over a new legion.
The terracotta army was never as silent as it looked. For centuries, the clay soldiers small inscriptions that seemed ordinary until AI began reading them together. That is when the army stopped looking like a monument and started looking like a record. The strange part is not that the inscriptions exist. It is what they may reveal when every mark is connected. Behind the soldiers, behind the emperor, behind the perfection of the tomb, there may be a much darker human cost. So what did AI decode from the terracotta army? And why is it worse than anyone expected? 1974 put the terracotta army back into human sight when farmers near Xi'an in Shanxi province uncovered the buried army of Qin Shi Huang. The world saw 8,000 warriors, 130 chariots, and 670 horses as a masterpiece of ancient China. What stayed quieter was that this army also carried the names of the people who made it. Every figure in the terracotta army carries marks from the production system. Some were impressed before firing, naming the workshop and supervising official. Others were incised after firing, pointing to individual workers. Across warriors, chariots, weapons, tiles, and construction materials, researchers have counted more than 40,000 inscriptions. Human scholars studied those marks one by one for nearly 50 years. In 2016, Zhuzhen Li of University College London published research in antiquity showing that individual craftsmen could be identified from the stamps. A single worker's mark could appear across multiple figures, proving the clay army was not anonymous after all. AI analysis changed the scale of the investigation. Instead of reading fragments separately, it could process the full 40,000-plus inscription dataset at once. Patterns across workshops, officials, and worker marks began forming a larger picture. The army was no longer just rows of soldiers. It became a record of the system that built them. The disturbing part begins when those names are placed beside the historical record of Qin Shi Huang's project. The inscriptions identify real workers, real organization, and real human labor behind the emperor's burial army. The question is no longer only how the terracotta army was made, it is what happened to the people whose names were left in the clay. The inscriptions are real, the names are real, and the pattern is larger than one workshop. The investigation begins with what those marks actually say, and what the full record reveals when AI reads them together. AI archaeology did not begin with the terracotta army alone. Research programs at Peking University, the National Palace Museum in Taipei, and a 2023 Jilin University study had already used machine learning on ancient Chinese writing, including oracle bone script and bronze inscriptions. Those projects proved that damaged ancient marks could be studied as patterns, not just isolated characters. Terracotta army inscription analysis builds on the UCL workshop stamp research that identified individual workers from their marks. Instead of reading one inscription at a time, AI pattern recognition can compare the full 40,000-plus inscription record together. What would take human epigraphers years can be cross-checked across workshops, officials, and repeated worker marks in one complete pass. Multispectral imaging and digital enhancement made the dataset stronger before AI even began reading it. Damaged, faded, or partly hidden characters could be made clearer. Giving the system access to inscriptions earlier, researchers could not fully read. That meant the analysis was not only faster than human study, it was working from a more complete record. AI assembled more than scattered names. It connected workshop distribution across the Qin Empire, traced career timelines of supervisors through multiple production years, and linked individual craftsmen across different figures. The result was a wider map of labor. Officials, workshops, and workers drawn from different parts of the empire into Qin Shi Huang's burial project. The disturbing finding was not one secret sentence hidden in the clay. It was the complete picture created when the 40,000 inscriptions, worker marks, and historical record were placed together. The army now carried a roster of real people who built the most famous archaeological site in China, and whose fate, after the project ended becomes the real question. The AI built the roster, but the first human clue came earlier. To understand why the names matter, the investigation turns to the 2016 UCL discovery and what the worker stamps proved about the people behind the army. Xu Zhenli's 2016 antiquity study gave the first clear proof that the Terracotta army was not built by anonymous hands. The workshop stamps were detailed enough to track individual craftsmen across multiple objects. A single worker's mark could appear on warriors, chariots, and weapons, turning the army into a record of repeated human labor. AI analysis took that finding beyond manual study. Human researchers could compare inscriptions one by one, but AI pattern recognition could search every repeated mark across the full 40,000-plus inscription dataset at once. That made it possible to assemble the most complete worker roster ever produced from Qin Shi Huang's burial complex. UCL research also showed that the workers did not come only from Xi'an or nearby Shanxi province. The stamps point to state workshops spread across the Qin Empire, meaning craftsmen were drawn from distant regions and brought into one imperial project. The clay army was not local decoration. It was organized labor on an empire-wide scale. Informal personal marks make the evidence even more human. Some signs were not official workshop stamps, but scratches or symbols made outside the administrative system. AI can identify these marks across warriors, weapons, tiles, and construction materials. If they carried meaning, they may be the closest thing to direct messages from the workers themselves. Supervisor stamps reveal the structure above the craftsman. The same official mark can appear across multiple production years, allowing AI to follow a supervisor's career through the project. When a mark suddenly disappears, it may point to the end of that official's role or the completion of the mausoleum's production record. The stamps identify workers, supervisors, workshops, and the scale of the operation. The next question is what happened to those named people after Qin Shi Huang's army was finished. Sima Qian's Shiji, written around 109 to 91 BCE, gives the darkest account connected to Qin Shi Huang's mausoleum. Roughly 100 years after the burial, the Han Dynasty historian recorded that Qin Shi ordered the inner chamber artisans sealed inside the tomb, along with the emperor's childless concubines, to protect the mausoleum's secrets. Sima Qian's wording makes the account difficult to soften. The workers were sealed inside so that none of them might come out again. This is not a modern theory added to the site. It is the translated content of an ancient historical record, written by China's grand historian from sources close to the Qin period. The number 700,000 gives the project its scale. Sima Qian described 700,000 conscript workers involved across the full mausoleum construction. Before AI, inscription research could only confirm parts of that labor system. The full 40,000-plus mark dataset now gives the strongest archaeological support for how massive the workforce really was. AI-assembled worker rosters change how the historical account feels. 700 and individual marks turn that number into real people. Each mark tied to a craftsman gives Sima Qian's account a more personal weight. The clay does not just record production, it records lives. UCL workshop distribution and later AI analysis show workers coming from across the Qin Empire, not only from Xi'an or Shanxi. Men were pulled from distant regions, brought to the emperor's burial project, and kept there for work that demanded permanent presence. The disturbing question is not how the army was made, it is whether the people who made it were ever meant to return home. The historical record names the fate, and the inscriptions give that fate human form. The next evidence comes from the ground itself, where bodies near the mausoleum may confirm what the old record described. Archaeological excavations around the Qin Shi Huang mausoleum have uncovered mass burial sites near the warrior pits. These graves contain hundreds of skeletons, many showing signs of traumatic death and hurried burial. The arrangement does not look ceremonial. It points to people who died under conditions consistent with execution, confinement, or forced labor. A 2021 report from the Shanxi Provincial Institute of Archaeology added more weight to that record. New mass burial finds near the mausoleum showed skeletal evidence that matched the darker parts of Sima Qian's Shiji. The old text described workers being sealed away shackles found around the ankles of skeletons near the Qin mausoleum provide one of the clearest signs of forced labor. These were not honored burials for craftsmen remembered with respect. The shackles suggest control, punishment, and confinement. They connect the workers named in the Terracotta Army inscriptions to a labor system built on command, not choice. AI-assembled rosters make the next question sharper. The inscriptions can identify workers and supervisors, while the burial pits hold unnamed bodies near the site they built. The evidence cannot yet connect one stamped name to one skeleton. But if that connection were ever made, the 40,000 plus inscriptions would become more than production records. Qin Shi Huang's inner burial chamber remains unopened, even though Sima Qian said artisans were sealed inside it. Soil samples from the mound have shown elevated mercury levels, matching his account of mercury rivers inside the tomb. That does not prove every detail, but it makes the historical record harder to dismiss as legend. The inscriptions give names, the text gives the fate, and the ground gives the bodies. The next step is understanding how AI connects those three records and where the evidence still stops. Human epigraphers spent nearly 50 years reading the Terracotta Army inscriptions piece by piece. Each stamp, incised mark, workshop name, and supervisor title had to be studied separately. The UCL 2016 study was a major step because it connected individual worker stamps, but it still worked from a partial record, not the full 40,000 plus inscriptions. AI pattern recognition changed the scale of the work. It could scan every workshop mark, every worker stamp, every supervisor designation, and every informal personal mark across the site at the same time. That produced a fuller organizational picture of Qin Shi Huang's project than slow inscription by inscription study could build on its own. Multispectral imaging and digital enhancement expanded what the system could read. Damaged, faded, or partly hidden marks could be clarified before AI compared them. That brought previously unreadable characters back into the dataset, including possible personal scratches, damaged workshop stamps, and marks earlier researchers could not confidently classify. AI analysis can show patterns that matter at scale. It can map the distribution of workshops, follow supervisors across multiple production years, identify repeated worker marks, and reveal how far the labor force reached across the Qin Empire. The inscriptions then become more than labels. They become the administrative skeleton of the entire mausoleum project. AI cannot prove what happened to any one named worker after the army was finished. The marks show who made what, not who died where. That final connection needs Sima Qian's Shiji, the mass burial evidence, and the archaeology around Xi'an. The machine can assemble the roster, but history and bones explain why the roster matters. The method is specific and the limits are clear. Now the investigation turns to what the full dataset reveals, and why the names are harder to ignore. AI analysis confirms that the Terracotta Army was built through a wider system than earlier partial studies could fully show. The inscription record points to workshops across the Qin Empire, with worker marks spread through the newly unified China. The workforce was larger, more organized, and more geographically scattered than the older 40,000 plus inscription record had first suggested. Supervisor marks give the timeline a sharper edge. AI can identify the same official stamp across multiple production years, following a supervisor from the beginning of the mausoleum project until the point where his mark disappears. That disappearance may connect to the project's completion, turning clay stamps into a record of careers that suddenly stop. Informal personal marks may be the most human part of the dataset. These scratches and symbols came from damaged inscriptions that earlier researchers could not read clearly. If they carried personal meaning, they may be the closest surviving communication from individual Qin workers to whoever found their work centuries later. AI evidence still has a hard limit. It can identify workers through stamps, and archaeology can identify bodies through skeletal remains near the mausoleum. but it cannot yet connect one named craftsman to one burial pit. The bridge between the inscription roster and the mass graves remains unproven, even though the two records now stand uncomfortably close. The disturbing picture comes from combining AI, Sima Qian's Shiji, and the physical burials near Xi'an. The workers were no longer just 700,000 conscripts in an ancient account. They became identifiable people, with marks left in clay, tied to the army they built, and to a fate the historical record describes in brutal detail. The full picture is clearer than ever, but one link is still missing. That gap between the names in the clay and the bodies near the tomb is where the investigation becomes hardest to close. Inscription data identifies workers through marks pressed into clay, sometimes only 2 centimeters wide. For some people, that stamp may be the only physical record that they worked on Qin Shi Huang's burial project. Mass burial data works differently. It gives researchers skeletal remains, shackles, and artifacts. The problem is that no method has yet connected one stamped worker mark to one specific body in the graves. Inner burial chamber remains the most important sealed space in the entire investigation. Sima Qian said the artisans were trapped inside after the mausoleum was finished, but that chamber has never been excavated. This means the workers identified in the outer inscription roster may include people whose remains are still inside the unexamined tomb, beyond the reach of current archaeology. Fourth Warrior Pit adds another unfinished clue. Its walls were raised, the floor was prepared, and then the work stopped. The most likely turning point was Qin Shi Huang's death in 210 BCE, followed by the revolts that disrupted the empire. AI analysis can identify workers active in that unfinished pit, but it cannot tell us what happened to them after construction suddenly ended. Informal personal marks may be the most intimate part of the record, but also the hardest to prove. Some scratches and symbols sit outside the official workshop system, possibly made by individual Qin workers themselves. AI pattern recognition can find repeated marks across damaged inscriptions, but it cannot safely say whether they were personal messages or simply arbitrary scratches without stronger evidence. AI has assembled the most complete worker roster the Terracotta Army has ever produced, and that roster now stands beside Sima Qian's account of sealed workers. But no specific roster member has been matched to any specific burial remains. That is why the gap matters. The connection is strong, disturbing, and historically grounded, but still a documented inference, not a closed identification. The gap does not weaken the investigation. It makes the silence around the workers harder to ignore. Now the evidence must be weighed carefully between what AI proves, what history records, and what the graves still cannot name. Mainstream interpretation begins with a careful limit. AI analysis made the Terracotta Army inscription record more complete, but it did not uncover one hidden confession. The darker meaning comes from scale. Sima Qian's record of 700,000 conscripts was already known, but AI turns that number into named workers, repeated stamps, workshop links, and real people inside the system. Stronger interpretation gives AI a larger role. By reading damaged marks, organizing the 40,000 plus inscriptions, mapping Qin workshops, and tracking supervisor stamps across production years, the analysis adds detail human research had not fully assembled. The picture becomes more disturbing because it is more specific. The labor force is no longer a shadow behind the warriors. It has structure, names, and timelines. Speculative claims go further than the evidence allows. The inscriptions do not reveal secret plans from Qin Shi Huang, hidden instructions for the burial chamber, or direct records of specific executions. They are administrative marks from a construction system. Their power is not in exposing the emperor's private thoughts. Their power is in showing the people who built his afterlife army. Documented evidence is strongest when 3 lines are placed together. The names and marks are in the clay. The fate is described in Sima Qian's Shiji. The bodies and burial evidence sit in the ground near Xi'an. AI does not prove every connection, but it brings those records closer than before, turning separate evidence into one clearer human picture. Most honest conclusion is also the hardest one. The Terracotta Army remains a marvel of ancient China, but the full inscription record shows the cost behind that marvel with sharper detail. AI did not simply decode clay. It helped reveal a labor system where the people who built the emperor's eternal army may have left their own names inside the thing that outlived them. The evidence does not turn every mark into a final answer, but it brings the investigation back to one question. What does it mean when an army of clay still carries the names of the people who may never have left? The Terracotta Army has been excavated for 50 years and studied by archaeologists from across the world. Its 8,000 warriors are praised for their faces, craftsmanship, and organization. But AI has added another layer to that record, the most complete roster yet of the people whose hands produced Qin Shi Huang's army. One 2-centimeter stamp appearing on 43 warriors turns the mystery personal. AI links that mark across the full dataset, giving one worker a repeated presence in the clay. Sima Qian records what happened when the project ended. The mass burial sites hold the physical evidence. The name, the account, and the body still cannot be fully joined. The inner burial chamber remains unopened, and Sima Qian placed the sealed artisans inside that chamber, not only in outer graves. Soil samples from the mound show elevated mercury, matching his description of humanity. The inscription roster includes inner chamber workers. Some names in the clay may belong to people still sealed beneath that soil. The fourth pit leaves another silence. Its walls were raised, its floor was prepared, and then work stopped after Qin Shi Huang died in 210 BCE. Workers brought to Xi'an for that unfinished pit left marks in the inscription record, but Sima Qian does not clearly tell what happened to them after the project collapsed. The worse than we thought is not that the Terracotta Army is less magnificent. It is that 700,000 conscripts no longer feel like a distant number once AI turns the record into identifiable workers. The army becomes more than a monument to Qin Shi Huang. It becomes a record of people consumed by the thing they built. No final answer can match one stamp name to one set of remains yet. But the names are in the clay. The unopened chamber beneath the mercury-laden soil still holds the question the army cannot answer.